Here's something that surprises almost every American client that I chat to, and that is that you may be able to retire in France up to 10 years earlier than you ever thought possible. In this week's episode, I chat to Richard Hammond from French Connections, and we discuss why France is such a great place to retire to and is ahead of places like the UK and America for retirees.
Most Americans don't realise how much they can retire early in France, right?
Yeah.
You come along with $1 million in investments, which is making you what, 80 grand a year, let's say $80,000 a year roughly. And I'm not going into details here, but if you had $80,000 a year in France, you'll live a very nice life if you're living in rural France.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And of course, British people in this comparison don't really live with that option because they have to go all the way to selling their home to cash out. And then they don't know where to put their money. So what their idea is to buy another house in France. So they can't retire early, so to speak. They have to wait to retirement. But Americans, different ballgame, right? If you've got $1 million and you're 401, you're happy to rent, which most American people are. Hey, they can retire at age 52, right? That's the reality. They can live in France. And then when their social security kicks in at 62 years old, they're flying, right? Yeah. They've still got all of their investments. They've still got a great tax treaty. So why wouldn't you use France with that in mind? And the stability of France. You know, why do people use France as a relocation place, not as a holiday place in a way? It's because the process that might be hard, although I'd argue they're no harder than anywhere else in the world, really. And if arguably probably easier, right? If you look at what the UK has become since Brexit, I know if you're not working now, the UK is pretty much impossible to move to. And as an American, your first choice might actually be England. There's no retirement visa. So, you know, France is maybe sometimes in reality, let's face people's second choice, but it does that very well of having all of these policies that are advantageous to early retirees. It has a great healthcare system ranked 3rd or 4th in the world. And for comparison, if you're watching this in the US, I think, unfortunately, you guys are ranked 52nd in the world right now. So healthcare, massive topic of relocation. It's not free, by the way, guys. People think it's free. It's not completely free, but it is very good and very well. And the infrastructure, right? It's got great motorways, high-speed trains. You can bop around Europe within a few hours. I've made the case, right?
Interesting, yeah. And I think those are the three main things I see mostly when chatting to people, particularly from America, is cost of living, safe and secure, and I suppose healthcare comes under the cost of living as well. But the standard of healthcare here, and touch wood, we haven't experienced it that much so far firsthand, but the dealings we have had have been fantastic. And I often joke when I'm speaking to clients or even my own family, I have an app on my phone for Dr. Lib. I could probably, what time is it? Maybe get an appointment this afternoon to see my GP. You know, and I compare that to my parents in the UK. It might be, 3 weeks on Thursday before they can see theirs. So it is a big draw, and I think it's a big credit. Like you say, the infrastructure in France, the healthcare, cost of living rurally. I often get asked this, how is it in compared to the cities? Well, like anywhere, I suppose. It's in the boulangerie in our village here, I don't know, it might be €1 for a croissant. In Toulouse, it might be €2. That doesn't quite tell the full picture, but it gives an idea that living in the countryside, which is beautiful and green.
I got told off for not giving real examples. Let's give a real example. You live in a similar house to mine, right? Quite a big house. You're fortunate. You worked hard. How much do you pay a year for your house? You got a swimming pool?
Yeah. In terms of the
annual insurance for your whole property?
Ooh. Couldn't tell you exactly, but maybe about €30 a month, I think.
Okay, so that is probably 100% cheaper than anyone in the US. The other thing is, what's your tax every year for your property tax? Maybe something around 1,400 euros?
Yeah, about 16, I think we pay.
16, you live a bit closer to Toulouse. Imagine that. That's half of what somebody would pay for the equivalent house in
Yeah.
the US per month.
Yeah.
People
Crazy, isn't it?
like that. People
Yeah.
don't realize how cheap it is. And there's another factor, which is somebody told me the other day. There's been a study in the US that for people that are not educated to where France is in the world, right? When they're looking at that and they never traveled to France, they might think this is a third world country. It's not. France has got an immense amount, and in the news at the moment, it's like France is broke. Guess what? Every country in the Western world is
Yeah, yeah.
broke, right?
Show
Yeah,
me one that isn't.
but there's somehow they're getting the focus. There's got to be something going on that they're getting that focus. But the point
Yeah.
being is that you wouldn't feel that every day. And one thing I noticed, I'm sure you do, how clean is the place? How
Yeah.
clean is the
Yeah.
place in
Yeah.
general? Go to the United Kingdom, and it is a disgrace. It's a disgrace to our country
Yeah.
in England, the fact that there is so much rubbish and litter everywhere. And you go
Yeah.
to even the poorest, most rural part of France, and everything is immaculate.
Yeah. I've mentioned this to a few people in the last year or 18 months when I've been back in the UK, and particularly driving around, perhaps to see family or clients, you notice by the side of the roads how much litter there is. Particularly, I mean, on the motorways, you're going too fast, but dual carriageways, perhaps. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? And France is
Awful.
maybe not quite spotless, but it's very, very
Oh,
clean. And I think people take a
they
certain
take
pride.
pride
And
in their
yeah,
villages, in their places, and it's not a question of money, so to speak. It's just taking pride.
pride.
Um,
Yeah,
and I would argue that the only people that are really throwing stuff on the streets in France are not French, right? That's
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
reality.
yeah. It's the culture as well,
Because
isn't it?
that's I can tell you it's ingrained in us. When I
Yeah.
was a kid, I can remember the day that I was in a rugby coach and I was going somewhere and somebody was going to throw something out the window. And what was said, and it was very severe. It was like, "Do not do that. We'll basically chop your hands off." No, I'm only joking. But it was more. It was, somebody else has got to pick that up, and you're not going to be that person. So
Yeah.
don't bloody do that again, right?
Yeah.
And those are old school values clearly, but they are very much. I noticed it the other day, even more so when I went to the coast in the UK. The beaches in France are impeccable, right? They're
Yeah.
always clean. In England, it's just awful, and it's such
Yeah.
a shame. But I think, to come back to your question, why do people move to France? For all of those above, and potentially also because when you come to an age of retirement, you are seeking that opportunity to be able to travel easily to other countries in Europe, to
Yeah.
experience the culture. And something that we take for granted is the history.
Yeah.
If you're living in America, you don't have buildings that are 350 years old that you
Yeah.
can buy and live in.
Yeah. Well, a quick funny story on that. The house we have has a fireplace, and one of the stones is engraved 1612, which we believe the property next door was the original landowner's property, and this was a second property. But 1612, and I always joke with my wife, who's from South Africa, that this house was built before South Africa was even discovered. And that
Yeah.
sort of, it's a bit tongue in cheek to say that, but I think that gives an idea of how much history and how much there is to see, even around where we are. Down, I suppose, an hour south of us, Carcassonne, you've got beautiful places like that. There is a lot to do and a lot to see, and it's easy to get around. And just going back to your point about travel, America's a big old place. I was speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago who I think they lived in Colorado, and I think I'm right in saying a 2-hour flight and they'd still be in the same state. They'd still be in Colorado. Now, I was looking recently for a flight for me and my daughter to go away for the weekend. And from here, from Toulouse, I think within 2 hours, we could get to 8 different countries. And that's staggering. And I think a lot of people, particularly in America, don't realize how much you can travel using France as a base if you want to explore other countries and other cultures. There's lots to do in France, but if you want to get away and, visit one of the neighboring countries, there's also lots
Well,
of
it's massive,
options.
but also, like, I think what you got to remember is how cheap this is
Yeah.
to be able to travel. Because once you're over 50 years old in France, you get a special deal on the rail. I think it was every 60, but there's basically you get your rail card essentially, which has like a minus 25, minus 35% discount on there. So you can be sat in first class on the TGV, and you can be from Paris, you can be in Aix-en-Provence in 3.5 hours. You can go for lunch in London if you leave at 7 a.m. and you can come back that same day from Paris. You know, or maybe you might do the other way around. But you see where like that is, people don't maybe realize the geography, but flights are so cheap for Americans in Europe. Like we don't realize how cheap our flights are compared to the US. So there's just all of these things that make it super attractive. And the biggest thing is, I don't think people realize how early they can retire if they were considering France, especially if they're willing to rent.
And I think that's touching on that. That's where financial planning comes in. Is a lot of the conversations we have is, can I afford to? Well, let's crunch the numbers. And 9 times out of 10, I think you're right. People can before they think they can.